Hi, welcome to this Corbettmaths video. In this video, we're going to look at the video solutions to the Corbettmaths Practice Questions on multipliers. So we're going to be using multipliers whenever we're answering percentages questions. If you need any extra help on multipliers, if you go to Corbettmaths and go to the videos and worksheets section and scroll down to video number 236A, there's a dedicated video tutorial there on multipliers. Alternatively, you can scan this QR code. But in this video, we're going to focus on the video solutions to the practice questions, so let's get started. Okay, let's have a look at our first question. Our first question says, circle the calculation that will work out 9% of 2,000. So 9%, well 9% is a decimal number, would be 0.09. So if we want to work out 9% of something, you can just multiply it by 0.09. So that would be, in terms of our options, it's not going to be that one, or that one. It's going to be this one here. It's going to be 0.09 times 2,000. That would work out 9% of 2,000. Okay, let's have a look at question number 2. Question number 2 says Connor's trying to work out 64% of 190, and he types in 190 multiplied by 0.64 into his calculator. Has Connor used the correct method, and to explain our answer? Okay, so in terms of the number he's using, he's got 190 and he's got 190. That's good. In terms of his multiplier, he's trying to work out 64% of it. And 64% as a decimal number is 0.64. So that's correct as well. So will that give him the correct answer? It will. He's multiplying the number by the multiplier. And that's it. So yes. And that's it. So I've written yes, that 64% is equal to 0.64. So 190 multiplied by 0.64 will give 64% of 190. Okay, let's look at the next question, question number 3. So question number 3 says Tiana's trying to work out 40% of 65,000. And she types 65,000 multiplied by 0.04 into her calculator. Has Tiana used the correct method? Explain her answer. Now Tiana's trying to work out 40% of 65,000. Now 40% would be equal to 0.4. So she's actually typed in 0.04. So she's actually going to work out 4%, not 40%. So let's explain that. And that's it. I've just explained that no, that 40% is equal to 0.4, not 0.04. And that Tiana will actually find 4% of 65,000, not 40% of 65,000. Okay, let's look at the next question, question number 4. So question number 4 says, write down a multiplier that will find out 7% of a quantity. So if we want to find 7% of a quantity, well, we want to multiply it by 0.07 or 0.07 because that is 7%. So if you multiply something by 0.07, you'll find 7% of it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 5. So question number 5 says, write down a multiplier that will find 80% of a number. So 80% is equal to 0.8. So if you multiply something by 0.8, you'll find 80% of it. So the multiplier will be 0.8. So if you want to find 80% of a number, you can just multiply by 0.8. Okay, our next question, question number 6. Question number 6 says, write down a multiplier that will find 37.5% of a number. So if we want to find 37.5% of a number, we could use a multiplier, and that multiplier would be, well, we change the percentage to a decimal, so we'll move the digits 2 columns to the right, so it'll be 0.375. So if you multiply a number by 0.375, you'll find 37.5% of it, so 0.375, and that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 7. So question number 7 says, write down a multiplier that will find 2.8% of an amount. So if we want to find 2.8% of a number, you can multiply by a multiplier, and the multiplier would be, if we move the digits 2 columns to the right, that'll be 0.028, moving those digits 2 columns to the right. So as a multiplier, that would be 0.028. Okay, question number 8. Okay, question number 8 says, write down a multiplier that will find 174% of a number. So if you want to find 174% of a number, you just need to change the percentage to a decimal. So if you move those digits 2 columns to the right, you'd get 1.74. And that makes sense because if you're multiplying by 1.74, it's going to get bigger than what you started with. And if you find 174% of a number, it's going to be bigger than what you started with. So the multiplier would be 1.74. And that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 9. So question number 9 is a bit different than the ones we've looked at so far because all the questions we've looked at so far have been working out a percentage of a number. So we wanted to work out 20% of a number, or 51% of a number, and so on. But here we're actually going to increase by a percentage. So when we're increasing by a percentage, we're going to be adding that percentage on to 100%. And then we're going to see what that is, and then write that as a multiplier. So the question says, circle the calculation that will increase 380 by 25%. So we want to increase 380 by 25%. Now if you increase something by 25%, you would then have 125%. And then 125% as a decimal number, if we move the digits 2 columns to the right, will be 1.25. So if you multiply something by 1.25, you increase it by 25%. And you can check it. If you want to find 25% of this number, you can half it and half it again. So half of it would be 190, half it again would be 95. And then if you add 95 onto that, you'd get 475. And if you do 380, this option here, 380 multiplied by 1.25, you get that's also equal to 475. So that's right. So if you want to increase something by a percentage, you add it on to 100. And you find out what percentage that would be, and then you write that as a multiplier. You then just change that to a decimal, and that'll be your multiplier. So if you want to increase something by 25%, the multiplier would be 1.25. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 10. So question number 10 says, circle the calculation that will increase 430 by 6%. So if you increase by 6%, you start off with 100%, you increase by 6%, you would have 106%, and 106% as a decimal would be 1.06. So if you multiply something by 1.06, you'll increase it by 6%, so that will be this option here. And actually, just to have a look at the others, that would increase the number by 60%, that would decrease the number by 6%, and that actually decreases the number by 60%. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 11. So question number 11 says, circle the calculation that will decrease 45 by 2%. So if we're decreasing by 2%, we start off with 100%, we go down 2%, so we'll be left with 98%. And 98% as a decimal will be 0.98. So that would be this option here. If you multiply 45 by 0.98, that would decrease it by 2%. So if you're decreasing by a percentage, you take it away from 100, you find what percentage you're left with, and then you just change that to a decimal, and then that would be your multiplier. This multiplier would increase it by 20%, this multiplier would decrease by 20%, and this multiplier would actually increase by 2%. But this one would decrease by 2%, which is what we wanted. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 12. So question number 12 says, Noel is trying to decrease 750 by 30%. So he wants to decrease by 30%. And he types in 750, well that's correct, multiplied by 1.3 into his calculator. How does Noel use the correct method? Explain your answer. Now here, he's multiplying by 1.3, so his answer is actually going to get bigger than 750. He's increasing by 30%, but the question is to decrease by 30%. So if we wanted to decrease by 30%, you start off with 100, you take away 30, that'll leave you with 70%, and then that's your multiplier. Your multiplier would be 0.7 if you change that 70% to a decimal. So if you take the 30% away from 100, you're left with 70%, so that'll be 0.7 or 0.70. I tend to just use 0.7 rather than 0.70. And so that's it. So he's actually increased by 30%, not decreased by 30%. So let's explain that. And that's it. And the question said, has Noel used the correct method? So no, because Noel has increased by 30%, not decreased by 30%. The multiplier that he should have used should have been 0.7, because that would decrease by 30%. Okay, and then if we have a look at our next question, the next question says, write down a multiplier that will increase a number by 42%. So if you increase something by 42%, you would have 142%. And 142% as a decimal would be 1.42. And that's it. So the multiplier would be 1.42. Okay, let's have a look at our next question, question number 14. So question number 14 says, write down a multiplier that will decrease a number by 21%. So we're going to start with 100%. Now we're decreasing, so we're going to go down 21%. And if you've got 100 and you take away 21, you're left with 79. And 79% as a decimal will be 0.79. So if you multiply something by 0.79, you reduce it by 21%. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 15. So question number 15 says, write down a multiplier that will decrease a number by 10%. So you've got 100% to begin with, we're going to decrease it, means we're going to go down 10%, so we're left with 90%, and 90% as a decimal will be 0.9. You could write 0.90, but I would tend to just write down 0.9. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 16. So question number 16 says, write down a multiplier that will increase a number by 2.5%. So if we've got 100% to begin with, and we add 2.5%, we would have 102.5%. Now we want to have that as a multiplier, so that's a decimal number, so we're going to change this percentage to a decimal. So we're going to move the digits 2 columns to the right. So if we move these digits 2 columns to the right, we would get 1.025. And if you multiply something by 1.025, you'll increase it by 2.5%. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 17. So question number 17 says, write down a multiplier that will decrease a number by 0.8%. So if we've got 100% to begin with and we're decreasing, we're going to go down by 0.8%. We'll be left with 99.2%. That's what we'll be left with. And then if we change that to a decimal, that would be 0.992. If you multiply something by 0.992, then that would decrease it by 0.8%. And that's it. Okay, let's have a look at our next question, question number 18. So question number 18 says increase 5,900 by 29%. So if we want to increase by 29%, we would have 129%, which is 1.29 as a decimal. So that's our multiplier. So we're going to take our 5,900 and we're going to multiply it by 1.29, and let's see what we get. So 5,900 multiplied by 1.29 is equal to 7,611. So the answer is 7,611. And that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 19. So question number 19 says they increase 62 by 70%. So if we increase something by 70%, we'd have 170%. So as a decimal, that would be 1.7 or 1.70. So if we take our 62 and multiply that by 1.7, we will increase it by 70%. So 62 multiplied by 1.7 is equal to 105.4. So that would be 105.4. And that's it. We've increased 62 by 70%. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 20. So question number 20, we've not been asked to increase or decrease, we've just been asked to find 74% of 62,000. So we're just going to multiply 62,000 by, because it's 74% as a decimal, that would be 0.74, so that's multiplied by 0.74. And then that would tell us 74% of 62,000. So 62,000 multiplied by 0.74 is equal to 45,880. And that's it. That's our answer, 45,880. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 21. So question number 21, we've been asked to decrease 8,490 by 20%. So we're going to decrease by 20%. So if you decrease by 20%, you're left with 80%. So our multiplier would be 0.8. So if we take our 8,490 and we multiply that by 0.8, that will decrease it by 20%. So 8,490 multiplied by 0.8 is equal to 6,792. So the answer is 6,792. And that's it. We've decreased by 20%. Okay, our next question, question number 22. So question number 22, we've been asked to increase 720 by 6.5%. So if you increase by 6.5%, you would have 106.5%. And then as a decimal number, that would be 1.065. So if we take our 720 and multiply that by 1.065, that will increase it by 6.5%. So 720 multiplied by 1.065 is equal to 766.8. So the answer is 766.8. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 23. Okay, so question number 23 says decrease 8,490 by 13%. Well, if you decrease something by 13%, you're left with 87%, and 87% as a decimal will be 0.87. So we're just going to take our 8,490 and multiply that by 0.87, and that would decrease it by 13%. So 8,490 multiplied by 0.87 is equal to 7,386.3, and that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 24. Okay, so question number 24 says circle the calculation that will decrease 4,950 by 1.2%. So if you decrease something by 1.2%, well, if you decrease it by 1%, you've got 99, and then another 0.2 would be 98.8%. That's what you'd be left with. And then as a decimal number, that would be 0.988. So if you multiply something by 0.988, you decrease it by 1.2%. So it's not that one, that's decreasing by 12%. That's decreasing by 0.2%, so not that one. That one's decreasing by 1.2% because we're multiplying by 0.988. And that one's actually increasing by 1.2%, so it's not that one. So that's the correct calculation. Okay, let's have a look at our next one, question number 25. So question number 25 says circle the calculation that will increase 90 by 205%. So if you increase something by 205%, you'd have 100% to begin with. You're increasing it by 205%, so you'd then be left with 305%. And 305% as a decimal number would be 3.05. So if you multiply something by 3.05, you increase it by 205% because you've got the 100% to begin with, and then you're adding on another 205%, so you'd have 305%. So then that would be this option here because that's increasing by 205%. So that would be the correct answer. And that's it. Okay, let's have a look at our next question, question number 26. So question number 26 says, work out 427% of 910. So we've not been asked to increase or decrease in this question, we just want to work out 427% of a number. So we just need to change this percentage to a decimal. And then if we move the digits 2 columns to the right, we'd have 4.27. So if we multiply by 4.27, that will work out 427% of this number. So 910 multiplied by 4.27. So let's see what that would give us. And that's equal to 3,885.7. And that's it, so 3,885.7. And we've worked out 427% of 910. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 27. So question number 27 says, Liam multiplies a number by 0.86. He has decreased the number by what percentage? So he's decreased the number by what percentage? So if he multiplies it by 1, it's staying the same, so that's 100%. This is multiplied by 0.86, that's working out 86% of the number. And if he's working out 86% of the number, that means the numbers be decreased by 14%, because he's had 100% to begin with, he's taken away 14%, and he's left with 86%, and 86% as a decimal will be 0.86. So he's reduced it, or he's decreased it by 14%, and that's our answer. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 28. So question number 28 says, Thomas thinks of a number y. So he's got this number y, and he increases it by 20, and then he increases the answer by 30%, and he gets the final result, z. And part A says, what number could Thomas multiply y by to get z? So in other words, how could he go straight from his initial number, his start number, to the final answer? So let's consider multipliers here. If he starts out with y and he increases it by 20%, he would be multiplying by 1.2. So if you multiply something by 1.2, you're increasing it by 20%, because he's got 100% to begin with, he's adding on 20%, so that's 120%, and as a decimal, then that'd be 1.2. So if you multiply by 1.2, you're increasing it by 20%. He then gets this number. He then increases that number by 30%, so he then multiplies by 1.3, because if he multiplies this number by 1.3, he increases it by 30%, and he gets his final result, z. So we want to find what number Thomas could multiply y by to get z, so to go straight from here to here. Now, if, for instance, he was multiplying by 2 and then multiplying by 3, to go straight from here to here, you would do 2 times 3, 6, so you'd multiply by 6. So if we do 1.2 times 1.3, if we do 1.2 multiplied by 1.3, that would tell us this one number that he can multiply by. So 1.2 times 1.3 is equal to 1.56. So if he multiplies by 1.56, he can go straight from here to here. And that would be it. So what number could Thomas multiply y by to get z? The answer would be 1.56. And that's it. So we just multiply the two multipliers together to find the one multiplier, which would do it in one step. And that's it. And then part B said, what's the overall percentage increase? Well, if you multiply something by 1.56, you're increasing it by 56%. So it would be a 56% increase, 56%. And that's it. And multipliers are really handy for questions like this. So if, for instance, something's been increased by 20% and then by 40%, and you want to find the overall percentage change, multipliers can be really, really useful for that. And that's it. Okay, let's have a look at our next question, question number 29. So question number 29 says, the population of a town decreased by 20% between 2004 and 2014. So between 2004 and 2014, the population from here to here decreases by 20%. So it gets 20% smaller. And then the population then increased by 15% between 2014 and 2024. So it decreased by 20% to begin with, and then it increased by 15%. And Patrick's saying that the population in 2024 is 5% less than 2004. So he's saying that this population is 5% less than that population. And we've been asked to show that Patrick is incorrect and to find the correct percentage decrease. Now you could do this question using some numbers. You could say let the population time be 1,000, decrease it by 20%, you get 800, increase that by 15%, see what you get, and then work out the percentage decrease by doing the change divided by the original times 100. So that's one approach that you could use. Alternatively, in this question, I'm just going to use the multipliers, because the population of the town decreased by 20% between 2004 and 2014. And to decrease by 20%, we could multiply by 0.8, because if you decrease by 20%, you're left with 80%, and then the multiplier would be 0.8. And then we're told between 2014 and 2024, the population increased by 15%. So to increase by 15%, you'd multiply by 1.15. That increases by 15%. So if we take the population in 2004 and multiply that by 0.8, you get the population in 2024, and then multiply by 1.15, you get the population in 2024. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to find out what number we'd multiply by to get from 2004, the population 2004, to the population 2024. So we would do 0.8 multiplied by 1.15, and that would tell us the one number you'd multiply by to go straight from this population to that population. So let's do that. So 0.8 multiplied by 1.15 is equal to 0.92. So the multiplier to do it in one step would be 0.92. Now that's not a 5% decrease, that's actually an 8% decrease. If you multiply something by 0.92, you're decreasing by 8%. So we've been asked to show Patrick is incorrect, so we've shown here that he's incorrect, and we've been asked to find the correct percentage decrease. That'll be 8%, the decrease is 8%, and that's it. Okay, and let's look at our last question, question number 30. So question number 30 says the price of a litre of petrol was decreased by 2% between May and June, and then the price increased by 10% between June and July. And Matt says that the price of a litre of petrol increased by 8% between May and July. And we've been asked to show that Matt is incorrect. Okay, so let's write down our months. We've got May, we've got June, and we've got July. So the price of the petrol decreases by 2% between May and June. So as a multiplier, that would be multiplying by 0.98. If you multiply something by 0.98, you're decreasing it by 2%. But then the price increases between June and July by 10%. So if you multiply something by 1.1 or 1.10, you increase it by 10%. So it increases by 10% between here and here. So if we can find what the one multiplier would be between May and July, we can then find out the overall change in price. So if we do 0.98, our first multiplier, multiplied by our second multiplier, we can find out what the one multiplier would be. So 0.98 multiplied by 1.1 is equal to 1.078. So that means if we wanted to do this in one step, our multiplier would be 1.078. And that's 107.8%, or a 7.8% increase. So the increase is 7.8% because it's being multiplied by 1.078, and that's increasing by 7.8%. Now, Matt said the price was being increased by 8%, and that's clearly not 1.08. That would be the multiplier we would have been looking for, 1.08, but that's not that. So that's it. And then part B says what's the correct increase in price between May and July? So the percentage increase between May and July was 7.8%, and we just looked at that because if the multiplier was 1.078, that's a 7.8% increase, and that's it. And that's it. So these have been the video solutions to the Corbettmaths Practice Questions on multipliers. If you need any extra help on multipliers, there's a video tutorial on Corbettmaths. If you go to the video and worksheet section and scroll down to video number 236A, there's a dedicated video tutorial there on multipliers. Alternatively, you could scan this QR code, or alternatively, you can wait to the end of the video and I'll put a little icon for you that you can click to bring you straight to that video tutorial. But also, really hope you found this video useful. If you have found it useful, could you please like it and please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And again, at the end of the video, I'll put an icon there for you that if you wanted to subscribe to Corbettmaths on YouTube, then you can click that link and it'll do that. But thanks very much for watching. Cheers. Bye.